change the world.
On we go.
Hello, welcome back to Coffee Over Apples. My name is Steph, and this is my favorite books of 2023 video. I only read 34 books this year, and usually every year I try to do like a top 10 fave or best of the year, and then like a top 10 worst books of the year, because I didn't read as many books as I would have liked to, or like some of the books that I read were actually for finishing grad school and weren't for like fun and entertainment. I'm only going to talk about my favorite and worst books of the year that like actually fit that description. So it's not a full 10 list. I've actually got about 9 books on this list for best books of 2023. Let's get right into it. I would say at number 9 is going to be The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. I read a bunch of horror this year, which is wonderful. I'm definitely finding who I am as a horror reader, and I plan to read a ton more horror in 2024. Taking place on a Native American reservation following a family, but specifically the different men in these families who were part of an incident involving, is it elk? Involving some elk and a hunting incident and spirits. The first part of this book does read as a haunted house story, which was super fun and interesting, and the way that these different men are kind of plagued by the guilt, but also spiritual folklore relevancy in coming to terms with what happened was beautiful. I adore Stephen Graham Jones. I actually read 2 of their books this year, which is wonderful. I highly recommend this. As you can see, I tabbed it a bunch, which probably means that I had a lot to say about it. I did do a full vlog for this, so I'll link that up above if you want to go watch the vlog and my full thoughts about the entire thing. But definitely recommend. It's a little bit gory, not too much, I would say. But again, I feel like I have like a different threshold. So if you're not into gore, I would not suggest this at all. Also a bunch of animal horror too, like harm to animals, if that's one of your triggers. Definitely don't pick this up. It is one of mine, and I had to put this down a little bit. But other than that, though, the way that it resolves in the end was spectacular. At number 8 is Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. I did do a recording for a full review of this. I don't know that it's going to be up before this video, but it is up on my TikTok for a shorter review if you want to go see that, which is linked in my description. This book is about abusive relationships. In my opinion, it's more specifically about narcissistic abusive relationships. So even though that this is a horror, it is more so about like a psychological horror, following the brides or spouses of Dracula, if you will, because this does involve a polyamorous relationship and queer relationships. But the way that those relationships necessarily come about are not in the healthiest of ways. And like, what do the victims in this relationship do about this? So I enjoyed it. I don't think it's for everybody, but if you're looking for something that's a bit more extreme horror, you're probably not going to enjoy this as much. There's like a little bit of blood and stuff because it is vampire related. But other than that, it's like a very fresh take on vampire horror in my opinion. So I loved it, and it's pretty short. So you could probably get through this in a day. The other Stephen Graham Jones book I read, which is Mapping the Interior, again, a very short novella, but the ending of this was so good. I did not see that ending coming. This is about a young boy who is Native American and is living with his mother, a single mother, and his younger brother in a trailer park, I believe. And there is what he thinks is the spirit of his deceased father haunting him at night. And this little boy thinks that if he stays up late enough, he'll be able to glimpse his father coming to visit them, which he hopes is for good reasons, but he's not sure. And he thinks it has something to do with his little brother, who might be on the spectrum or have some sort of cognitive disability. And so he's like, is my dad here to help him? Is he here to help me? I miss him. There's a little bit of like sibling jealousy in thinking that his father's coming to be there for his brother and maybe not for him. But ultimately, this is a horror. So things go wrong, but in the end, not in the way that I thought that they were going to. So while I was rooting for this little boy to like find some peace and figure out what was going on with his dad, things that they do in order to find peace at what what, it was so good. Again, you can totally read this in a day. It's only about like 105 pages or so, a 10 of 10, do recommend. At number 6 is The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. I actually read this as a book club pick for the Sci-Fi book club that I run, and I absolutely loved this. I did not think that this was going to make a favorite books of the year's list, but here we are, because this book did a lot of things that I want contemporary sci-fi to do, and though this book is older, it made me think, and I can see how it challenged a lot of norms at the time of its publication around thinking about gender. And this was so wonderful because in a way, I wouldn't say it's necessarily like a fall from grace, but definitely about a character getting humbled, because our main character is from space, not necessarily from Earth, but like from a human federal association, and they've come to this planet called Winter, what they've called Winter, to kind of determine if the people of this planet deserve or are willing or want to come willingly into the association of humans so that they can become part of this like galactic commons in a way. And the people may not really be interested. They're not really hostile to this person, even though they're clearly different. They look different. Humans have been on this planet for thousands of years, to the point where they've had some sort of like evolutionary and cultural deviations. And so this person is learning new ways of looking at culture by interacting with these people who tend to be non-binary and or transgender, depending on who they are, but also their cycle of living, because they have like a monthly cycle in which they transition gender and also look at familial relationships with different kinds of hierarchies, or like hierarchies at all, question mark. And so the main character is looking at all of this through a cisgendered lens, and this was written in the 1960s. But by the end of the book, makes relationships and goes through things and starts to question, like, well, who am I to be passing these judgments? But this is book 4 in a series, and I haven't read the first 3 before this. We picked this up because someone had recommended that you can read this book out of series order, and it doesn't matter. And I highly agree with that. I highly, highly recommend this book. I definitely will be going back and reading the rest of the series at this point. I don't know if I want to go back and read the 3 before this or just continue from where this left off, because I'm so curious as to what happens. But anyway, highly recommend. Probably my favorite sci-fi of the year. Let's talk about a book that I gave 5 stars recently, which was The Fisherman by John Langan. I knew that this was going to be a favorite. I have a full vlog coming out with thoughts about this because I read it over the Christmas break. It was a different kind of horror. This was really refreshing. It is a cosmic horror. It is, kind of short. It's like 200 and something pages. This is set in like 1990 or 1991. We're following a older white male character who's living in the Catskills in New York. So if you're familiar with the Catskills, it's upper Hudson River Valley, and there's a lot of fishing, hiking, mountains out there, which is really nice, especially if you're like driving up past that to get to Canada. And he's dealing with grief. This entire book is about men dealing with grief, especially and specifically the grief of losing their wives for different reasons, losing family, and kind of like, who is this cisgender man and what identity does he hold if he spends his life working to be able to fulfill the needs of caring for a family, and that family is taken away from him and that's no longer part of his identity. It was really wonderful. I loved the stories because it's really a story and a story and a story and a story. This character goes fishing because fishing has kind of filled the void of losing his wife. He's not really answering anything of the questions that he has or anything that he needs to be able to resolve his grief. And in fishing, he ends up meeting someone who tells him the story about this particular lake that he's looking for and the history of that lake, which goes back to the early 1900s when it was built as a reservoir. And this man who owned that lake or owned a lot of property in the lake, had a lot of power in that lake, and their interactions with the immigrant families who were coming to do hard labor in converting this village into a reservoir for New York City. Horrible things happen along the way. It is zombies and things, like not zombies. I don't know how to explain it. There's a lot of death, a lot of violence, and folklore of all kinds. I don't know how to explain this to you without giving away the ending, but everyone kind of got what was coming to them because none of them found healthy ways to resolve their grief. And like, even if they kind of did, they still didn't make great choices along the way. And that's really what this is about. So if that sounds interesting to you, pick it up. The cover though, this is my favorite cover of the year. Can you look at how stunning this looks? Definitely a like American romanticist painting, Hudson Valley School kind of stuff. Number 4 on my list of favorite books of the year is House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danieleweski. This book sent me spiraling. I both loved and hated this book, and you might know that if you watched my first time reading House of Leaves vlog that I posted like a month ago. This is a multimedia, what's the word? I forgot what the word is. I'm just going to post the word here.
When I grow up, I want to be a big word.
This book is formatted non-traditionally. There is a change of text. There's mirror text because this is a flip of the words that are on the previous page in the same box. There are like just strange things that happen, pictures that are kind of drawn, documents, things like that. And it is a haunted house story, but again, about unhealthy relationships and people just not processing grief. I think that's kind of like the theme of all these books that I loved this year, or like my favorite horror books of this year, is that it's about grief and processing grief, and that's really heavy. And it as a topic, I'm guessing that's just probably one of my favorite topics in reading horror. But we're following this main character who finds manuscripts in a house of an old dead man that he wrote, even though he's blind, from interviewing other people who watched a film that was done by a guy who lived in a haunted house. Best explanation that I'm going to give you. I could spend all day talking about this, but I already did for like close to an hour, I think, in my other video. So like I'll link that up above so that you can go watch it. This is a cult classic for a reason. Highly, highly recommend it. Also, I'm going to say that I'm really liking horror books that are set in like 80s, 90s. That's my vibe right now. Fisherman set in late 80s to between like, I'm probably going to guess 1989 to like 2001 or 2002. This one is set in like between 1992 and 1999. And then another one of my favorite books was setting in like 1980s. The time span right before the turn of our century, peak setting for me. Bringing it back a little bit farther though, book number 3 on my best books of 2023 is Babble by R.F. Kuang. You can see how much I tabbed this, which is super satisfying. Also, that pink tabs are for like favorite scenes or scenes that I loved. I also did an entire hour video vlog and review of this book with spoilers and non-spoiler thoughts. So again, I will link that description up above. But I loved this. It is different because it's not a horror. It's actually a literary fiction and a fantasy. And is the first R.F. Kuang that I've ever read. I haven't read The Poppy War. I should probably read The Poppy War because I now absolutely love their writing. And while I think that there is a lot of room for this book to be more nuanced, this book did the opposite of what the books on my least favorite books of 2023, what they didn't do, which is where one or multiple of those books showed horrible things happening, but also like didn't address them and just kind of assumed along the way that the reader would know, oh yeah, this thing that's happening is like not okay, right? Not necessarily all the time. Not necessarily all the time are people going to be picking up on these things, because, critical thinking is an acquired skill. This book told you every time something bad happened, hey, see this thing that's happening right here? Not good. Not good because X, Y, and Z. And the characters told you that through their thoughts, through their actions, through their feelings. So if you're looking for something that really does spend, is not so like in your face, hey, see this thing about systemic racism? It's pretty fucked up. Then you're not, if you don't like that, you're not gonna like this. I liked it because I kind of like, I like to see that sometimes, though I do want more nuanced conversation where we're like kind of seeing things through the experience and not so much told. This very much like tells it to you. A group of students from different countries that are being colonized are brought to London, or is it England? I forget. They're brought to Oxford, and it's set like 200 or 300 years ago. I don't really remember. Or is it the 1800s? I think it's the 1800s. And they're brought there to be scholars, but specifically because they're from other countries where English is not their native language, but because they were raised to speak proper English and are going to become like these magical translators. So they're very much tokenized, and they're made aware of this from the beginning. But they come there as children, and so they're seeing it as an opportunity until they get old enough to register that, hey, we are being used, because now we're going to be sent back to our respective countries to work for the colonizers and not necessarily make the kind of change that we want in our country, but to like enforce their rules. So it goes from there. It's also the secondary title of this is, I think the secondary title of this is pretty apt because technically the full title is Babble, or the Necessity of Violence and Arcane History of the Oxford's Translators Revolution. So it's about revolution. I adored this. I'm probably going to read it again eventually, but it made me feel so many emotions. I was very upset at the ending. I fell in love with these characters and, anarchy. Book number 2, which I don't know that I talk about enough because I absolutely adored this book with all of my heart, was Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. If I hadn't read the book that's number 1 on my list, this would have been number 1. I mean, obviously, because it's number 2, something else, had to take number 1 spot. But in like a favorite books of all time list, this is probably going to be there. This is the autobiography of Trevor Noah. And something interesting about it is that it kind of cuts off once he becomes famous. So it's not really talking about his time as you or I may know him from being a celebrity. But his childhood and his adolescence growing up in Africa at the end of apartheid. And it's so heartbreaking. It's so raw in listening to his stories of poverty and his struggles dealing with a society which has kind of placed him in a position of opposition, but also privilege, and depending on the aspect scenario to who he's talking to, because everything was divided in apartheid by either whites, coloreds, or blacks, right? There was no such thing as like being in between or being biracial. Like colored is other still, but it's still in this hierarchy. And his mother is the central figure of this story. This woman is incredible. This woman needs a freaking statue, man. The things that she went through and survived and dealt with, and doing the best that she could to lead a life of happiness, to raise her children with a sense of intellectual freedom, and to rebel against the system while still like understanding that she has to partake in that system. And so there are limitations to her power and her decisions, but she's going to do the best she can by maintaining that in her household, maintaining her ideologies, right? And like changing the next generation in a way. Incredible story. If you need to be humbled, or you know someone that needs to be humbled, read this. It'll humble you real quick. I cried, I laughed, I sobbed, I screamed. It was great. Actually, as I'm thinking about it now, this should probably book number 1 on my list. The only reason that it's not is because I am such a horror fanatic. I love horror, that if I find a new favorite horror book of all time, that's what's taking first place. But like in my heart of hearts, this is number 1. Absolutely. And the best book of the year for me, my favorite horror book of the year, and also a new all-time favorite, is Little Heaven by Nick Cutter. This book is all kinds of fucked up. I do not recommend this book. Look into it. If it sounds like something you would like, read it. If you're looking for diversity, don't. There is one main character in here who is a black man, and he was my favorite character in this entire book. I personally love what Nick Cutter did with him. But everyone else is a bunch of, like, out of their mind, religious cult white people in the middle of nowhere who are up to no good. And a couple of assassins. The other 2 are also white people, and they are also aware of like this extremist religious cult that's out in the woods, and that some shady stuff is going on. But the 3 assassins need money, and so they take this job to go out there and do what they think is a rescue mission. But like someone's raising hell, literally. So, but not in the way that you expect. This is a cosmic horror, and it is a cosmic horror done so well. This book freaked me out. I had to put it down multiple times because I was like, can't do it. I'm uncomfortable. I'm gonna have nightmares. I'm also a very visual person, so like for me, when I read a book is like a movie in my head. So every time something would happen, I would see it, and then therefore it would occur in a nightmare. And if something can give me nightmares as a book, that is wonderful, because it sufficiently creeped me out. Just so good. Also, like, if you're a fan of classic horror, I think that you might like this. It's got that like old school horror feel. I love this book so much. I feel like I've been screaming it from the rooftops to anyone who likes extreme horror to pick this up. But yeah, but that being said, again, it is an extreme horror. So if you don't like certain things, if you got some serious triggers, all of it's in here, especially harm to children, because evil children are a thing in here. If you've got claustrophobia, probably not for you. You know, I just, oh man, this solidified Nick Cutter as my favorite horror author. I've got 2 more books to read by him in 2024. I'm a little bit nervous about them, but so far, just absolutely exquisite. Okay, so That's it for my favorite books of the year. Please let me know what some of your favorite books are and if you think that there's something that I would like, because I'm gonna go book shopping pretty soon for my birthday and I plan on doing a major haul video. So let me know like ASAP so I can check it out and potentially add it to my shopping list. Anyway, I hope you've had a happy holidays and you're gonna have a happy new year. Thanks so much. Talk to you later. Bye.
On we go.